Have you ever felt judged the second you walk into a room? Judged by your clothes, your accent, the color of your skin? For one gate agent at JFK, making snap judgments was a nasty habit, a little power trip to get her through a long day. But on a crisp autumn morning, she picked the wrong passenger to bully. She looked at a poised, elegantly dressed black woman holding a first-class ticket and saw only one thing: someone who didn't belong. With a sneer, she uttered the 4 words that would detonate her career and send shock waves through an entire industry. This line is not for Coach. What she couldn't possibly know was that the woman she was barring from the plane didn't just have a ticket. She owned the entire fleet. This isn't just a story of karma, it's a story of what happens when quiet power is finally forced to speak. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 hummed with a familiar, organized chaos. It was the sound of 1,000 hurried goodbyes, the rhythmic clatter of rolling suitcases over polished floors, and the distant, reassuring roar of jet engines spooling up for journeys to distant corners of the world. For most, it was a place of transition, a functional purgatory between origin and destination. Dr. Serafina Hayes, however, found a strange sort of peace in the chaotic symphony. To her, the roar of a Rolls-Royce Trent XWB engine was a more beautiful sound than any concerto. The graceful arc of a winglet on an Airbus A350 was a more masterful stroke than any painter's brush. This was her world, not just as a passenger, but as its architect. She sat in the Orion Atlantic Airways Celestial Lounge, a space designed for the airline's most valued customers. Yet, Serafina looked intentionally unremarkable. She wore a simple but impeccably tailored charcoal grey pantsuit, a silk shell top in a soft cream colour, and practical, elegant loafers. Her hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, and the only jewellery she wore was a classic timepiece on her wrist, a Patek Philippe watch that was a quiet nod to her appreciation for fine engineering, and a simple gold band on her ring finger. She was reading through aeronautical engineering schematics on her tablet, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. To anyone who bothered to look, she was just another business traveller, perhaps a mid-level executive preparing for a meeting. This anonymity was a luxury she cherished. As the founder and CEO of Etheria Dynamics, the world's leading private aerospace leasing and technology firm, her face was well known in boardrooms from Seattle to Singapore. Etheria didn't just lease aircraft, it innovated them, retrofitting fleets with proprietary fuel efficiency systems and ultra-light composite materials. The very airline she was flying today, Orion Atlantic, was one of her biggest clients. Every single wide-body aircraft in their international fleet, all 78 of them, was owned by Etheria Dynamics and leased to Orion under a multi-billion-dollar contract. Her flight today, OA1112 to Geneva, was on one of her newest assets, an Airbus A350-1000, registration GOADX. She was flying to Switzerland to finalize the acquisition of a smaller avionics company, a move that would solidify Etheria's dominance in the market for another decade. She always made a point to fly on her own assets, unannounced, to experience the service and the machinery just as any other passenger would. It was her version of a surprise inspection. Across the terminal, at gate B24, Brenda Granger was having a monumentally bad day. It had started with a screaming match with her landlord over a rent increase she couldn't afford, and had curdled further when her supervisor, a weaselly man named Markham, had publicly praised a junior agent for a suggestion Brenda herself had made a month prior. Brenda felt trapped. 15 years with the airline, and she was still here at the gate, a glorified bouncer in a polyester uniform, dealing with an endless parade of entitled, clueless passengers. Her bitterness had calcified over the years into a rigid, prejudiced worldview. She sorted people into boxes with a glance. The loud family with too many carry-ons were a nuisance. The young backpackers were cheap and would probably try to sneak extra bags on. The businessmen in flashy suits were arrogant and demanding, and in her particularly sour view, black passengers in the first-class line were always suspect. She'd seen it all, she told herself. Upgrades on points, one-time splurges, credit card frauds. In her mind, they were temporary visitors in a world they didn't truly belong in. It was a vile, baseless prejudice, but it was the cracked lens through which she viewed her world. She tapped her acrylic nails on the counter, her smile a thin, brittle line. "Good morning," she'd chirp, her voice dripping with false sincerity, before finding some minuscule infraction to wield her power over. A slightly oversized bag, a wrinkled boarding pass, a question asked at the wrong time. Each was an opportunity to assert her dominance in the tiny kingdom of Gate B24. As the pre-boarding announcement for Celestial First Class was made, Serafina Hayes closed her tablet, slipped it into her leather tote bag, and made her way from the lounge to the gate. She walked with a quiet, confident stride, the posture of a woman accustomed to commanding respect without ever needing to demand it. She saw the agent at the podium, a woman with tired eyes and a name badge that read Brenda. She saw the tightness in her jaw, the way her gaze flickered over the passengers, sizing them up. Serafina had seen that look before. It was the look of someone deeply unhappy, someone who mistakes authority for power. She took her place in the nearly empty priority lane, behind a gentleman in his late 60s who was cheerfully chatting with the agent. When he passed through, Serafina stepped forward, offering a polite, small smile. She held out her passport and her first-class boarding pass. Brenda didn't even look at the documents. Her eyes did a quick, dismissive scan of Serafina, from the simple suit to her unadorned face, and her lip curled into a barely concealed sneer. "I'm sorry," Brenda said, her voice loud enough for the growing queue of economy passengers to hear. "The economy boarding hasn't started yet. You'll need to step to the side." Serafina's smile didn't falter, but a flicker of surprise registered in her eyes. She gently pushed the boarding pass another inch across the counter. "I believe you'll find this is for first class. Seat 2A. Brenda let out a short, sharp laugh that was pure condescension. She still hadn't touched the documents. She gestured with her chin towards the back of the rapidly forming economy line. "Ma'am, I know what a first-class passenger looks like. This line is for priority boarding only. The coach line is back there. You need to wait until your zone is called." The pronouncement hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Coach only. It wasn't just a directive. It was a judgment, a public declaration of where Brenda believed Serafina belonged. The handful of other passengers in the priority lane, all white, turned to stare. A few in the economy line snickered. Serafina's calm demeanor remained unbroken, a placid lake over a core of volcanic rock. She met Brenda's hostile gaze with a look of unnerving serenity. "Perhaps," Serafina said, her voice dropping to a low, clear, and dangerously steady tone, "you should look at the ticket." The battle of wills had begun, and Brenda Granger, fueled by a day of petty frustrations and a lifetime of prejudice, had just picked a fight with the one woman in the entire airport she could not afford to anger. The air crackled with a sudden, suffocating tension. Serafina's words, though spoken softly, carried the weight of an ultimatum. For a moment, Brenda was taken aback by the woman's sheer nerve. The quiet defiance, the lack of apology or retreat, it was not the reaction she expected. It only served to stoke the embers of her foul mood into a raging fire. "Ma'am, I'm not going to ask you again," Brenda snapped, her voice rising in volume and pitch. The false sweetness was gone, replaced by the raw, grating edge of her authority. "Step out of the line. You are holding up my first-class passengers." She pointedly looked past Serafina to a young man in a branded fleece vest and expensive sneakers who had just gotten in line behind her. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding everyone's gaze. Serafina did not move. She slid her documents further across the counter until they were directly under Brenda's nose. "My name is Dr. Serafina Hayes. That is my boarding pass for seat 2A. And this," she tapped the dark blue cover of her passport, "is my identification. I will not be stepping out of the line." The use of her title, Doctor, seemed to infuriate Brenda even more. It was another thing that didn't fit into her preconceived box. "Oh, a doctor, is it?" Brenda scoffed, finally snatching the boarding pass. She glanced at it, her eyes widening for a fraction of a second as she saw the name and the seat number. But admitting her mistake would mean backing down, and Brenda Granger didn't back down, especially not in front of an audience. Her brain scrambled for a new angle of attack. "This could be fraudulent," she declared, her voice now a full-blown accusation. "We've had issues with counterfeit documents and stolen frequent flyer miles. I'm going to need to see the credit card you used to purchase this ticket." This was a dramatic overstep of standard procedure, and they both knew it. A low murmur rippled through the other passengers. The older gentleman who had boarded before Serafina, Mr. Peterson, had paused near the jet bridge entrance, turning back to watch the unfolding drama with a concerned frown. Serafina's patience, a deep and vast reserve, was beginning to thin. Her expression remained neutral, but her eyes held a new intensity, a focused, diamond-hard glint. "This ticket was not purchased with a credit card," she stated calmly. "It was booked through my corporate travel division. It is part of a comprehensive contract my company holds with this airline. Now, are you going to scan my pass, or do you require a supervisor?" The word supervisor was a direct challenge. Brenda's face flushed a blotchy red. She felt her authority slipping, being questioned in front of everyone. She was determined to win this. "I don't need a supervisor to handle someone trying to game the system," she spat. She began typing furiously into her keyboard, her knuckles white. "Let's see here. Dr. Serafina Hayes." She squinted at the screen, a malicious grin spreading across her face. "Ah, I see. There seems to be a flag on this booking, a security alert. I'm afraid I can't allow you to board at all. You'll have to come with me." It was a blatant, outrageous lie. There was no flag. There was no alert. There was only Brenda's desperate attempt to save face by doubling down. Serafina knew it was a lie. She had access to the most intricate details of the airline's booking systems through her company's integrated software. There was no flag. But to the watching crowd, it now seemed as though Brenda had a legitimate reason for her actions. "A security alert?" Serafina repeated, her voice laced with a cold, precise disbelief. "What kind of security alert?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss that. It's a security matter," Brenda said, puffing out her chest. She lifted the flap of the counter. "Now, if you'll please come with me, away from the gate area." At this point, Mr. Peterson, the elderly passenger, stepped back towards the podium. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a reedy but firm tenor. "I was here when this lady arrived. She was perfectly polite. You didn't even look at her ticket before you started accusing her. This seems highly irregular." Brenda shot him a venomous glare. "Sir, this is an official airline matter. Please proceed onto the aircraft." "I think I'd rather wait and see that this is resolved fairly," he replied, crossing his arms. The standoff had attracted the attention of Brenda's supervisor, David Markham. He was a man who moved through life with the goal of creating as few waves as possible. He scurried over, his face a mask of harried concern. "What's the problem here, Brenda?" "This passenger," Brenda said, pointing a finger at Serafina, "is causing a disturbance. Her ticket is flagged for security, and she's refusing to cooperate." Markham looked at Serafina. He saw a well-dressed black woman standing her ground with unnerving calm. Then he looked at his agitated, red-faced employee. His calculus was simple and cowardly. Side with the employee, de-escalate, and get the plane out on time. The customer, in his experience, was usually the variable that could be managed, or if necessary, removed. "Ma'am," Markham began, adopting a placating tone that set Serafina's teeth on edge. "I'm David Markham, the gate supervisor. I understand there's some confusion with your ticket. If you could just step over to the customer service desk with me, we can get this all sorted out." "There is no confusion, Mr. Markham," Serafina said, her gaze now fixed on him. Her voice was level, but it carried a new, steely resonance that made him flinch. "Your agent has refused me boarding based on a baseless assumption." She then invented a security flag to cover her prejudice. "I am a first-class passenger on this flight, and I intend to board it. The only thing that needs to be sorted out is your staff's behavior." Markham's face tightened. He was not used to being addressed with such direct, unassailable confidence. His desire to smooth things over was rapidly being replaced by a desire to end the confrontation. "Brenda," he said, turning to his agent, "can you confirm the security flag?" Brenda, now backed by her boss, nodded vigorously. "Yes, Mr. Markham, it's right there on the screen. Code 7B Alpha. Requires secondary screening and interview." She had just invented the code on the spot. Markham nodded gravely. He turned back to Serafina. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but procedure is procedure. A 7B Alpha is a mandatory flag. We can't let you board. Our flight is scheduled to depart. You'll have to be rebooked after you've been cleared by security." He signaled to 2 airport security officers who were standing nearby, watching the commotion. Serafina watched the entire pathetic charade play out. The lie, the weak-willed supervisor, the appeal to non-existent procedures. She had given them every chance to do the right thing, to simply look at the ticket, apologize, and let her pass. They had refused. They had chosen to escalate, to lie, and to publicly humiliate her. A profound sense of disappointment washed over her, followed by a cold, resolute clarity. She had built her empire on precision, on facts, and on the unshakable principle that performance and integrity were all that mattered. These people, with their petty prejudices and pathetic power plays, were an insult to everything she stood for. They were a bug in a system she had helped design, and it was time to debug the system. She gave a single, slow nod. She took a step back from the counter, a picture of graceful concession. Markham and Brenda exchanged a look of smug relief. They thought they had won. Serafina reached into her tote bag, but she didn't pull out any more identification. She pulled out her phone. She looked Markham directly in the eye, her voice devoid of all emotion. "Mr. Markham, you have made a grave error. You have allowed your employee to deny boarding to a passenger based on racial profiling. You have then endorsed her fabricated justification. You have 2 minutes to reverse this decision." Markham scoffed. "Ma'am, who exactly do you think you are?" Serafina didn't answer him. She simply unlocked her phone, her thumb hovering over a name in her contacts list. She held his gaze. 2 minutes. The final boarding call for flight OA-112 to Geneva echoed through the terminal. The jet bridge was about to be pulled. Markham gestured to the security officers to escort her away. He turned his back on her, a final act of dismissal. 1 minute, Serafina said softly to his back. He ignored her. Brenda was already busy scanning the next passenger's ticket, a triumphant smirk on her face. Serafina pressed the call button. The phone began to ring. It was answered on the first ring. "Elias," she said, her voice calm and clear, but now imbued with the unmistakable authority of a CEO. "Get me Julian Croft. Yes, right now. Tell him Serafina Hayes is calling about his A350 fleet, specifically the one at JFK, Gate B24, that I'm currently being denied access to, and tell him his clock is ticking." Julian Croft, the CEO of Orion Atlantic Airways, was in a board meeting at the airline's gleaming headquarters near Heathrow, London. They were discussing quarterly fuel expenditure projections, a topic that normally held his rapt attention. He was a man obsessed with efficiency, with margins, with the 1,000 tiny details that kept his airline profitable in a brutally competitive industry. His personal assistant, a young, perpetually frazzled man named Thomas, burst into the room without knocking, a cardinal sin in Croft's world. He was pale, holding a vibrating phone out, as if it were a venomous snake. "Mr. Croft, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but it's Elias Vance," Thomas stammered. Croft waved a dismissive hand. "Tell him I'll call him back. We're in the middle of—" "Sir," Thomas interrupted, his voice trembling slightly. "He says it's for you. It's about Dr. Serafina Hayes." The name dropped into the sterile, air-conditioned boardroom like a 10-ton weight. Serafina Hayes. The room went silent. Every executive present knew that name. Serafina Hayes wasn't just a vendor or a partner. She was the foundation upon which their entire long-haul operation was built. She was the queen, and they were, in many ways, her vassals. She controlled the very assets that allowed them to exist. Julian Croft's blood ran cold. A call from Serafina Hayes's chief of staff, Elias Vance, was rare. A demand to speak with him immediately was unheard of. It could only mean one of two things: a catastrophic mechanical failure in one of her planes, or a deal-breaking level of displeasure. Both were terrifying prospects. "Put him on speaker," Croft commanded, his voice suddenly hoarse. Thomas fumbled with the phone, and the calm, collected voice of Elias Vance filled the room. "Mr. Croft, my apologies for the intrusion." "Elias, what is it? Is everyone all right? Is there a problem with an aircraft?" Croft asked, his mind racing through worst-case scenarios. "The aircraft are fine, Julian." Elias's voice was cool, precise. "The problem is with your staff. Dr. Hayes is currently at JFK, Terminal 4, Gate B24, for your 10:00 a.m. flight to Geneva." A collective, quiet sigh of relief went through the room. A passenger issue. They could handle a passenger issue. "She reports," Elias continued, his tone hardening, "that she has been publicly accused of holding a fraudulent ticket, denied boarding by your gate agent, and is currently being threatened with removal by airport security under the direction of your gate supervisor. This happened after your agent, a Ms. Brenda Granger, informed her that she looked like she belonged in coach only." The silence in the boardroom was now absolute, a thick, suffocating vacuum. The color drained from Julian Croft's face. He could feel the blood pounding in his ears. Of all the passengers in all the world, on all of his flights, to have this happen to her. The woman who could, with a single phone call and a reference to the brand integrity clause in their leasing contract, cripple his airline. "Give me the details," Croft croaked, grabbing a pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely write. Back at Gate B24, Brenda and Markham were attempting to ignore Serafina, trying to project an aura of control. but they couldn't help but notice the change in her. She stood perfectly still, phone to her ear, speaking in low, measured tones. The passengers left in the queue were all staring, sensing that the power dynamic had shifted in a way they couldn't comprehend. Yes, Elias. David Markham is the supervisor's name. The agent is Brenda Granger. That's correct. They fabricated a Code 7B Alpha security flag. No, I don't require their apologies. I require a resolution. The jet bridge is still attached. Hold the flight. The words, "hold the flight," hung in the air. For a gate agent and a supervisor, an unauthorized hold was one of the most serious infractions imaginable, causing cascading delays throughout the entire global network. Markham spun around, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "You can't hold this flight. Who do you think you're talking to?" Serafina lowered her phone slightly. She looked at him, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than calm crossed her face. It was a look of profound pity. "I am speaking to the man who is about to call your CEO," she said. "But I suspect you'll be hearing from him first." As if on cue, Markham's radio on his belt crackled to life. It wasn't the usual chatter from the ramp or cockpit. It was the direct priority channel from the airport's Central Operations Tower. B-24 Supervisor, this is Ops Director Chen. What is your status on OA-112? Ops, this is Markham. We are, resolving a minor passenger issue. We'll be closing out in 2 minutes. Negative, B-24. The voice from the radio was sharp. You will hold that aircraft at the gate. Do not close the door. Do not pull the jet bridge. I am getting a Priority 1 directive from the Executive Office in London. I repeat, hold the aircraft. A senior VP is en route to your position. ETA 5 minutes. Markham's jaw went slack. Priority 1 directive, Executive Office, Senior VP. These were terms he had only ever heard in emergency drills. He stared at his radio, then at Serafina. The smug confidence drained away from him, replaced by a creeping, horrifying dread. Who was this woman? Brenda had heard the call too. The triumphant smirk had vanished, leaving her looking pale and confused. She looked at Markham for guidance, but he was frozen, his mind struggling to process the impossible. Inside the aircraft, the pilot's phone rang. It was the Orion Atlantic Chief of Fleet Operations. "Captain Davies, what the hell is happening at your gate?" "No idea, Chief. Gate hasn't given us the all-clear. Some kind of passenger dispute, I think. Listen to me very carefully, Captain. You are not to push back from that gate without a direct, verbal command from me or CEO Croft himself. Is that understood? From the CEO. Sir, what is going on? I don't have all the details, but the name I was given was Dr. Serafina Hayes. Do you know who that is?" Captain Davies, a 20-year veteran, felt a jolt. He knew the name. Every senior pilot did. It was printed on the ownership plates in the cockpit. "Etheria Dynamics," he breathed. "The one and the same. Apparently, she's the passenger our people are refusing to board. So you sit tight, Captain, and be prepared to come out and apologize." Captain Davies leaned back in his chair, a low whistle escaping his lips. He looked through the cockpit window towards the gate, where the gate agents now stood like statues. "Holy Mother," he muttered. "They have no idea what they've done." The dominoes were falling, faster and faster, triggered by a single phone call. The quiet, unassuming woman in the grey pantsuit had pushed the first one, and now a tidal wave of corporate panic was about to crash down on Gate B-24. The 5 minutes that followed the radio call were the longest of David Markham's life. The atmosphere at Gate B-24 had undergone a bizarre transformation. The noisy, bustling energy had evaporated, replaced by a thick, anxious silence. The remaining passengers in the queue stood watching, their phones now surreptitiously recording. The security officers, who had been ready to escort Serafina away, now kept a respectful distance, looking utterly confused. Serafina herself had finished her call. She stood with a preternatural calm, her tote bag looped over her arm, observing the scene as if she were a theatre critic watching a particularly tragic play unfold. She didn't look angry. She looked disappointed. Markham's mind was a frantic whirlwind. He kept replaying the events, searching for an off-ramp, a way this could be someone else's fault. It had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. Maybe this woman was a VIP, a government official, someone with connections. But that didn't explain the sheer, immediate velocity of the response. A priority one from London, holding an international flight? This was beyond a VIP. This was something else entirely. Brenda, meanwhile, was beginning to panic. Her bravado had crumbled, leaving behind a raw, gnawing fear. She kept shooting desperate glances at Markham, but he refused to meet her eye. He was slowly backing away, both physically and metaphorically, trying to isolate her as the source of the problem. "Mr. Markham," she whispered, her voice cracking. "What's going on? That security flag was real, right? You saw it." Markham finally looked at her, his eyes cold and distant. "I saw what you showed me, Brenda," he said, each word a careful placement of blame. He was already building his defense. The sound of hurried, expensive shoes clicking on the terminal floor announced the arrival of the promised authority. A woman in her late 40s, impeccably dressed in a navy blue Dior suit, strode towards the gate with the focused intensity of a trauma surgeon arriving at a multi-car pile-up. She was flanked by two nervous-looking men in slightly less expensive suits. This was Camilla Rodriguez, Orion Atlantic's Senior Vice President of North American Operations, the highest-ranking executive at the airport. She didn't glance at Markham or Brenda. Her eyes scanned the scene and locked immediately onto the one person who seemed completely in command of the situation. Serafina Hayes. "Dr. Hayes," Camilla said, her voice a carefully controlled mixture of deference and deep anxiety. She extended a hand. "I am Camilla Rodriguez. I cannot begin to express how profoundly sorry I am for this unacceptable failure in our service." Serafina looked at the outstretched hand, but didn't take it. "Ms. Rodriguez," she said, her tone cool and professional. "Your apology is noted. However, the issue is not a failure in service. It is a failure in basic human decency and professional conduct." Camilla's face paled. She withdrew her hand, clasping it in front of her. "Yes, of course. You are absolutely right. There is no excuse. None whatsoever." She then turned her attention to Markham and Brenda, and the temperature at the gate dropped by 20 degrees. Her gaze was glacial. "You," she said, pointing a single, perfectly manicured finger at Markham. "Supervisor, explain this to me. And do not, for 1 second, think about lying." Markham swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Ma'am, Vice President Rodriguez, there was a discrepancy with the passenger's boarding pass, a security flag, a code 7B Alpha, I believe." Serafina interjected quietly, without a trace of sarcasm. The simple, factual repetition of their lie was more damning than any accusation. Camilla's eyes narrowed to slits. "A 7B Alpha? How interesting. Because I have the head of global security on the line right now, and he tells me that not only is there no such code in our system, but Dr. Hayes's profile is marked with our highest level of clearance and courtesy. The Celestial Key designation. A designation, I might add, that is reserved for a list of fewer than 10 people in the world. People who, should they ever be inconvenienced, can cost this company 9 figures in lost revenue." She let that sink in. The concept of 9 figures, $100 million or more, was so far beyond Markham and Brenda's comprehension that they could only stare, their faces blank with shock. Camilla turned to Brenda, whose entire body was now trembling. "And you, Miss Granger, did you, or did you not, tell this passenger that she looked like she belonged in coach only?" Brenda opened her mouth, but no sound came out. A tiny choked sob escaped her lips. In that moment, her entire world, the small kingdom of the gate over which she had lorded, had been reduced to ashes. She could only nod, tears welling in her eyes. "Right," Camilla said, her voice a clipped, final judgment. "Mr. Markham, Ms. Granger, hand over your airport ID badges, now. You are both suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation, which I assure you will be swift and conclusive. An escort will be here in a moment to see you out of the secure area. You are not to access any more company systems." Markham fumbled at his belt clip, his hands shaking too much to unhook his badge. One of the men with Camilla stepped forward and briskly took it from him. Brenda, crying openly now, handed hers over. They stood there, stripped of their authority, utterly humiliated in front of the crowd of passengers who had witnessed everything. The final crushing blow came from the cockpit. The door to the jet bridge opened, and Captain Davies, the pilot, emerged. He was a tall, imposing man with silver hair and a chest full of ribbons. He walked straight past the disgraced gate agents and stood before Serafina Hayes. "Dr. Hayes," he said, his voice deep and respectful. "Captain Alistair Davies, on behalf of my entire crew, I would like to offer my most sincere and humble apologies for the disgraceful treatment you have received today. It is an honor to have you aboard our aircraft, your aircraft. We are ready for you, whenever you are." He had called it her aircraft. If there was any lingering doubt in the minds of the onlookers, that single phrase erased it. A wave of whispers and furiously typing thumbs spread through the crowd. Who was she? The owner? Serafina finally allowed a small, tired smile to touch her lips. She gave a slight nod to the captain. "Thank you, Captain Davies. I appreciate that." She then looked at Camilla Rodriguez. "The damage done here today, Ms. Rodriguez, goes far beyond my personal experience. It is systemic. My company will be in touch with Mr. Croft's office to discuss how Orion Atlantic intends to address that." With that, she turned, gave a nod of thanks to Mr. Peterson who had stood by her, and walked down the jet bridge. The first-class flight attendant greeted her at the door with a look of pure reverence and terror. As Serafina settled into seat 2A, the door to the aircraft was finally closed. The engines began to spool up with that familiar, beautiful whine. The flight was finally on its way. But for Brenda Granger, David Markham, and Orion Atlantic Airways, the real turbulence was just beginning. The flight to Geneva was, by all accounts, flawless. The cabin crew treated Serafina with a level of deference usually reserved for royalty, anticipating her every need before she was even aware of it. Captain Davies made a point of coming back to her seat mid-flight to personally assure her of the aircraft's performance metrics, a gesture of profound respect from one professional to another. Serafina, for her part, was gracious and composed. She ate her meal, reviewed her documents for the upcoming merger, and gazed out the window at the curvature of the earth. But while she was cruising at 40,000 feet, a storm of unprecedented fury was tearing through the executive levels of Orion Atlantic. Julian Croft had convened an emergency board meeting. The atmosphere was grim. "She invoked the brand integrity clause," Croft announced, his voice heavy. He adjusted his tie, which suddenly felt far too tight. "Article 12. Section B of our primary leasing contract with Etheria Dynamics." The board members shifted uneasily. They all knew the clause. It was a standard, often overlooked piece of legalese in most contracts. But Etheria's was different. It had been written by Serafina Hayes herself and was notoriously ironclad. It stipulated that if any action by the lessee, Orion Atlantic, brought the Etheria brand or its principal officers into public disrepute, Etheria had the right to impose severe financial penalties, or in extreme cases, terminate the leasing agreements for the entire fleet and recall their assets. Recalling the assets was the corporate equivalent of a nuclear bomb. It would bankrupt the airline overnight. "What does she want?" asked a board member, an older man named Sir Reginald Pike. "Her office sent a preliminary list of demands an hour ago," Croft said, looking down at a sheet of paper. "It's comprehensive." He laid it out for them. First, a public, unreserved apology from him, as CEO, to be published in major international newspapers. Second, the immediate termination of the 2 employees involved, Brenda Granger and David Markham, with a note in their permanent records ensuring they would not be eligible for rehire in any capacity within the aviation industry, a move Serafina could enforce through her vast network of influence. But that was just the beginning. "She's demanding a complete overhaul of our employee training programs," Croft continued, "to be designed and implemented by a third-party diversity and inclusion consultancy of her choosing, and at our expense. Mandatory, annual, scenario-based racial bias and de-escalation training for every single customer-facing employee, from gate agents to pilots." The room was silent. This would cost millions. "Furthermore," Croft said, his voice dropping lower, "she is invoking the financial penalty clause. She is demanding a one-time payment of $10 million. Gasps echoed around the table. "Payable to whom?" Sir Reginald asked, aghast. "Not to her," Croft clarified. "Payable as a foundational grant to a new non-profit organization she is establishing. It's to be called the Hayes Initiative for Equity in Aviation. Its mission will be to provide scholarships and mentorship programs for women and people of color pursuing careers as pilots, aerospace engineers, and airline executives." The sheer brilliance of the move left the board stunned. Serafina Hayes wasn't just punishing them. She was forcing them to fund the solution to the very problem they had demonstrated. She was using their failure to build a legacy of change, turning their ugly, prejudiced incident into a force for good. It was a checkmate of staggering elegance. "And if we refuse?" someone asked quietly. Croft gave a dry, humorless laugh. "If we refuse, her legal team will begin the process of asset recall, citing our breach of contract. They'll start with the 5 A350s we have on the London-New York route. They will be grounded, repossessed, and leased to our biggest competitor, likely with a signing bonus funded by our penalty payment by the end of the fiscal quarter. She's not just holding the cards, gentlemen. She built the casino." There was no debate. There was no argument. There was only the grim, silent acceptance of their complete and utter defeat. The vote to accept all terms was unanimous. Serafina landed in Geneva, her phone buzzing with a confirmation from Elias. She read the message from Julian Croft, which dripped with capitulation and desperate apologies. She showed no reaction. For her, this was not about revenge. Revenge was an emotional, messy impulse. This was about correcting a flaw in a system. It was about balancing an equation. The injustice she had suffered was a symptom of a much larger disease. Brenda Granger and David Markham were not evil people in a vacuum. They were products of a corporate culture that implicitly tolerated their behavior, that promoted mediocrity like Markham's, and that allowed bitterness like Brenda's to fester into prejudice. Punishing them was necessary, but it wasn't sufficient. To truly fix the problem, you had to redesign the system, and that is what Serafina Hayes did best. For Brenda Granger, the fallout was swift and brutal. She was called into an HR meeting the next morning. It wasn't a meeting, it was an execution. Camila Rodriguez was present, her expression unreadable. The HR representative read from a script detailing her gross misconduct, violation of company policy, and actions leading to significant brand damage. She was terminated, effective immediately. Her medical insurance would expire at the end of the month. She was escorted from the building, her belongings in a cardboard box. The humiliation, however, was just beginning. Within days, the story leaked. A passenger had recorded the initial confrontation and parts of the aftermath. The video went viral. Brenda's face was everywhere, a meme for racial profiling, the airport Karen of the month. News outlets picked up the story, and while Serafina Hayes' name was initially kept private at her request, the details of the airline's groveling apology and multi-million-dollar donation gave the story incredible legs. Brenda tried to find another job, but the aviation industry is a small, tightly knit world. Her name was now toxic. No airline, no airport contractor, not even a rental car company at the airport would touch her. The note in her file, as mandated by Etheria Dynamics, followed her everywhere. Within 6 months, she had burned through her meager savings. The rent increase she had been fighting with her landlord about became an eviction notice. She had to sell her car, move out of her apartment, and end up in a cramped room in a shared house in a rough part of Queens. Her days were now spent not in a uniform of authority, but in the stained apron of a fast food restaurant, where she was paid minimum wage to deal with sullen teenagers who treated her with the same casual disdain she had once shown her passengers. One evening, while wiping down a sticky table, she saw a television in the corner of the restaurant playing a business news segment. The anchor was interviewing a poised, powerful woman about a new initiative changing the face of the airline industry. It was Dr. Serafina Hayes. And so the Hayes Initiative isn't just about opening doors, Serafina was saying, her voice calm and articulate. It's about ensuring the people who build, fly, and manage our global aviation infrastructure reflect the diversity of the world it serves. Brenda stared at the screen, a greasy rag in her hand. She saw the woman she had tried to humiliate, now being lauded as a visionary. She felt a surge of the old, familiar bitterness, the feeling that the world was rigged against her. But for the first time, a sliver of a different feeling pierced through the anger. The cold, hard, undeniable realization that she had done this to herself. Her prejudice hadn't been a source of power. It had been a poison that had rotted her life from the inside out. David Markham's fate was quieter, but no less devastating. His termination for failure of leadership and gross negligence also made him an industry pariah. He had a mortgage, 2 kids in private school, and a lifestyle built on his middle manager salary. It all evaporated. He lost the house. His wife, who had married him for his perceived stability, left him a year later. He ended up selling insurance, a job he despised, working on commission, and constantly struggling to make ends meet. His defining professional moment was not a promotion or a successful project, but a viral video where he stood by and did nothing. His cowardice had cost him everything. He would occasionally see Orion Atlantic planes flying overhead and feel a hollow ache in his chest, the ghost of a career he had thrown away because he was too weak to stand up to a bully and do the right thing. The karma that hit Brenda and Markham wasn't a sudden, dramatic lightning strike. It was a slow, grinding erosion of their lives, a direct consequence of the character they had revealed on that autumn morning. It was the real-life karma of a world that, while not always just, has a way of balancing its books. 2 years passed. In the fast-moving world of global news, the incident at JFK Gate B-24 had faded from the headlines, replaced by 1,000 other fleeting dramas. But in the corridors of the aviation industry, its impact was not fleeting. It was foundational. The shockwave had reshaped the landscape. The name once whispered in a viral video was now etched onto the cornerstone of a new era. The Hayes Initiative for Equity in Aviation was no longer just a well-funded startup non-profit. It was the new gold standard, a celebrated institution whose graduates were becoming some of the most sought-after talent in the world. The transformation was most profound within the walls of Orion Atlantic Airways. In a London boardroom, the same one that had once been filled with panic, a very different meeting was underway. CEO Julian Croft stood before the board, but his demeanor was not one of damage control. It was one of pride. On the large screen behind him was the company's annual report, filled with metrics that would have been unthinkable 2 years prior. As you can see, Croft said, gesturing to a chart, our customer satisfaction scores have seen a 12-point increase, with a 20-point jump among passengers of color. Our employee retention rate is at an all-time high, and for the second year in a row, we have been awarded Top Airline for Inclusivity and Corporate Responsibility by the World Travel Awards. He clicked to the next slide, which showed a mosaic of smiling faces, newly hired pilots, engineers, and station managers. Our partnership with the Hayes Initiative, he continued, which began as a mandatory settlement, has become our single greatest asset in talent acquisition. The training modules designed by their consultancy have fundamentally changed our corporate culture. It turns out that treating people with dignity is not just a moral imperative, it's also remarkably good for business. Camila Rodriguez, now the Executive Vice President for Global Passenger Experience, a position created specifically for her, took the floor. The 7B Alpha incident, as our internal review now calls it, was a catastrophic failure. But it forced us to look in the mirror. We learned that our old way of training was based on procedure, not on people. Now our focus is on empathy, de-escalation, and cultural competence. Our staff are more engaged, more empowered, and our passengers feel safer and more respected. What Dr. Hayes forced us to do was not just fix a problem, but to build a better airline. The board members, including a now enthusiastic Sir Reginald Pike, nodded in agreement. The $10 million penalty, which had once seemed like a crippling blow, was now viewed as the wisest investment the company had ever made. The airline had not just paid a fine, it had paid for its soul. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, in her sleek, minimalist office at Etheria Dynamics headquarters in Austin, Texas, Serafina Hayes was engaged in her favorite part of the initiative's work. Spread across her desk were the finalist applications for the next cohort of Etheria Fellows, the engineering scholarship track. She read through essays filled with passion for fluid dynamics, for composite materials, for the elegant mathematics of flight. She saw her own youthful fascination reflected in their words. Her eyes settled on one application in particular. It was from a young woman named Imani Jones from Compton, California. Her essay was magnetic. She didn't just write about wanting to fly. She wrote about the poetry of it. She described growing up in a small house directly under the flight path for LAX, where the roar of jet engines wasn't a nuisance, but a lullaby. She wrote about how she would lie in her backyard and watch the silver bellies of the 747s and A380s, not as objects, but as promises. Promises of a world bigger than her neighborhood, a world she was determined to see from the cockpit. She had overcome immense financial hardship, working 2 jobs to get her private pilot's license, but the cost of commercial flight school seemed an insurmountable wall. "The sky is calling me," she wrote at the end of her essay. "I just need a way to answer." Serafina took a pen and wrote a single word at the top of the application. Approved. She felt a quiet, profound satisfaction that went far beyond the humbling of a bitter gate agent. This was not about destruction. It was about creation. It was about finding every brilliant, determined Imani Jones in the world and clearing the runway for them. 18 months later, Serafina was on a flight from Singapore to San Francisco. It was an Orion Atlantic A350, one of her own, and she was in her customary seat, 2A. As the last of the passengers boarded, a figure in a crisp pilot's uniform paused beside her seat. "Excuse me, Mum," a clear, confident voice said. Serafina looked up. It was a young black woman, her uniform immaculate, her face beaming with a professional pride that was impossible to miss. Her name badge read, "I. Jones." "I'm First Officer Imani Jones," the young woman said, her voice trembling just slightly with nervous energy. "I know we're about to depart, but I saw your name on the passenger manifest, and I had to come and say thank you. I am a graduate of the first class of the Hayes Initiative." Serafina's composed expression broke into a genuine, warm smile. She recognized the name immediately, the girl who heard a lullaby in the roar of jets. "Ms. Jones," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "It is an absolute honor to have you flying this aircraft today." "The honor is all mine, Dr. Hayes," Imani replied, her eyes shining. "You didn't just give me a scholarship. You gave me a chance to answer my calling. My family, where I come from. A career like this felt like a dream for other people. You made it my reality." "The initiative may have opened the door," Serafina said, "but your passion and hard work are what flew you through it. I read your application essay myself. The sky was always yours for the taking." The 2 women shared a look of mutual respect and understanding, the architect and the pilot, the mentor and the mentee, 2 generations of trailblazers connected by a shared love for the sky. "Just promise me one thing," Serafina added. "Anything," Imani said without hesitation. "Make sure the view from your office is always one of progress," Serafina said. "And ensure every single person who steps onto your aircraft, no matter who they are, feels not just like a passenger, but like they belong." "Yes, Ma'am," Imani said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have my word." First Officer Jones gave a crisp nod and returned to the cockpit. A few minutes later, the aircraft pushed back. Serafina looked out the window at the massive Rolls-Royce engine, a marvel of engineering she knew down to the last turbine blade. As it spooled up with its powerful, familiar whine, she felt a sense of profound peace. The aircraft, her aircraft, accelerated down the runway and lifted gracefully into the air. It wasn't just carrying a few hundred souls across the Pacific. It was a symbol of a promise fulfilled, of a system redesigned. It was lifting an entire industry, one flight at a time, to a newer, higher, and far more equitable altitude. The story of Serafina Hayes isn't just about a single moment of satisfying karma. It's a powerful reminder that prejudice and arrogance often stem from a deep-seated ignorance. The agent saw a passenger. She failed to see a pioneer. She saw a skin color. She failed to see a titan of industry. This incident shows us that real power isn't about raising your voice, but about knowing the weight your words carry when you finally choose to speak. It's about turning a moment of personal humiliation into a catalyst for systemic, lasting change for thousands. It proves that the most effective response to being underestimated is not just to prove them wrong, but to rewrite the rules of the game so they can never be wrong in the same way again. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And for more stories about justice, karma, and incredible people who change the world, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. What did you think of Serafina's response? Let us know in the comments below.